Hello, Cookies here. We're going to be going over Mythic Huntsman and just talking about how to approach this fight as a Discipline Priest and just as a healer in general, looking at the fight, understanding the logs, understanding the patterns of the fight, so that when you go into this fight, either on progression or even on farm, you can have a cleaner mindset and understand how to really, excel in your role as a healer. This is through the perspective of a Discipline Priest, but you can take a lot of this info and just copy paste it to other healers. So we'll go ahead and just dive into the VOD first, and then after the VOD, we will go look at the log to kind of dive in a little bit further with timings and whatnot. So to start right off the bat, essentially as a Discipline Priest, so the major mechanic in this fight that you're going to be healing, and it depends on what strategy you're using, but Sin Seeker is going to be the primary thing that you're going to be healing through. A lot of groups are going to opt to do this immune strategy, which is what we're doing, but you should still be ramping for every Sin Seeker, because if you're not ramping for every Sin Seeker, there's not really other things to ramp for in this fight. So even if only a few people are getting hit by Sin Seeker, it's still worth ramping for it and healing the raid through it, because the raid's gonna be taking damage from other things at the same time. It's just Sin Seeker is the best way to time that, because it happens every minute and 15 seconds, which is like a perfect lineup for your Spirit Shell. So essentially right when we go into this fight, we have a Sin Seeker that pops out at 30 seconds, so we're just going to ramp for this. So I start off by just doing a little bit of damage, and then right here at about 25 seconds remaining on the timer, I go ahead and I'm going to start ramping here shortly. And we go 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then we'll Radiance. We will refresh our dot, we'll Radiance again, cover most of the raids, Spirit Shell, Schism, Mind Games, Mind Blast, Penance, our usual thing. And then that will cover this first Sin Seeker, because for this first Sin Seeker, we're not actually moving. We actually don't use immunities and all that. We're just regularly soaking this, so the raid's going to take a significant amount of damage. You can see that displayed through our healing here. And that's why we want to cover this. And then essentially what you're doing in this fight, so to kind of go a quick overview of the rest of the fight, or like your priority as a healer, you should be covering every major Sin Seeker cast. So every Sin Seeker cast, you should be looking to try to ramp. And you can see here that Sin Seeker has, 36 seconds left, and our Spirit Shell isn't off cooldown for 37. So that doesn't, line up with what we had in mind of Sin Seeker happens every minute and 15. But it still actually does, because it depends when you push the phases. As long as you push the phase, it will make the Sin Seeker timer a longer timer, and we'll kind of reset it back a little bit. So when we push this dog, this Sin Seeker will take an extra, 20 or so seconds. Okay, so the main priority is to heal every Sin Seeker, and then also when people get the Sin Seeker debuff, because even if you're using the immune strategy, there's going to be at least 3 players who get the debuff almost every time. So what you want to do with the immune strategy is you want to heal the players who have the debuff. So make sure you're tracking the debuff, and you should just always have healing going into these players. So as a Disc Priest, you should always make sure that you have atonements on as many people with Sin Seeker as possible during your downtime if you're not ramping or anything like that. So you can see here, like once my ramp is finished, I just apply a few atonements to the people with Sin Seeker, and then I use Radiance to cover the others, and now everyone with a Sin Seeker has my atonement on them. So as I'm sitting here just spamming Smite, Mind Blast, Penance, all these players are getting healed. And then what I do again is I start applying atonements to a few of them, and then I go right back into it. But I'm not going to over-apply atonements to everyone, because the Sin Seekers are going to fall off, so then it becomes, rather useless. And then it's just keeping atonements on the tanks. And then in this phase, when the Rip Soul is cast, we could plan like a mini ramp around this if we wanted to. I used my mini ramp on the Sin Seekers, and then I accidentally wasted an extra charge of Radiance. So that's where we made a mistake, because right here we should be ramping, and that's what we begin doing here. So that's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And I think that this is fine. I think it's more ideal to ramp a little bit sooner. But I think covering this Rip Soul and the Sin Seeker cast is actually pretty good. So I think this actually turned out to be okay with like how delayed my ramp got, essentially. I think it actually worked out better, because when the Rip Soul's out, the whole raid's taking damage. So if I would have ramped too soon, then my ramp wouldn't have hit that Rip Soul. So it's something you have to just play around with. I know it's tricky. I know it's like me saying, oh, you got to ramp, 10 seconds before Sin Seeker comes out. But now, I'm saying, well, maybe in hindsight, it's better to ramp as Sin Seeker is coming out. so that it lines up better with other abilities. And that's just part of Disc Priest that you can't just nail down to a T unless you do these fights a bunch of times. So you just got to get in there and play with it yourself and see, what works for you and what feels right. That's why I'm here, is to help streamline that experience down so that you don't have to deal with all the figuring everything out. You can just figure out the important bits. And then in this last phase, we're still covering Sinseeker even though we're immuning it, and then also we're mini ramping anytime that there is anytime we're moving the boss, essentially we can mini ramp. So here we apply our double atonements, or our double radiance, and then we have the Sinseeker coming out soon, so this is where I just start ramping. And this is a case where, I press Spirit Shell early this time for the Sinseeker rather than on it, like I did for the last one. Why did I do that? Because we were going to plan to move the dog a bunch here, and I knew that was going to happen. So I'd rather cover the raid for that, since we're immuning the Sinseekers, than be, fully ready for the Sinseekers. Looking back at this at the VOD, I would probably try to ramp a little bit later so that it would also hit the Sinseekers at the same time. But I think it works out either way as long as you're pressing Spirit Shell. In the last phase, it's really just, you can use your Spirit Shell and use your big ramps and mini ramps and all that stuff as they're available, because in the last phase, your whole raid's going to be taking a ton of damage every time that they move the boss like this. So you can almost guarantee that when you ramp, it's going to heal, somebody. Okay, so now we'll go ahead and take a look at the log really quick. So here's like the overall damage and healing done of the fight. And then what we're going to do is we are going to, again, Sinseeker, if you watch the Shriekwing video, it's another like bleed or damage over time ability. So we don't want to necessarily use damage taken as a metric of finding when it was happening. We want to use cast. So I just go to cast, I go to enemies, we're going to go to Huntsman, and we're going to look at Sinseeker. And then we can also go back to enemies here, and then go to Barghast and use Rip Soul. And that's just so that we also see Rip Soul, since that's another thing, we can essentially cover with mini ramps or a major ramp if we really wanted to. And then we will click off of that, we'll go to friendlies, we will go to ourself, and we'll look at Radiance and Spirit Shell. And now just looking at this, as we always do, we will go ahead and just evaluate how this looks. So the first thing is this gap between the first and second Sinseeker. This is where I used that ramp a little bit late, but it allowed me to use two radiances between my ramp, and I think that actually worked out really well. So this is still an okay pattern as long as we're hitting that ramp properly, and we did. We checked the VOD and it works really well. The first mistake that we see in here, just off of just pure visual of these graphs, is right here. There's a giant gap and there's no radiance cast. The best time to use this radiance would have been right here during this Rip Soul. So we need to make sure that we have a radiance in between here next time. I think it's because we were trying to lust and push the boss before the ad spawn, so I wanted to do as much damage as possible without any atonements out. But even with that, I should still be healing the raid and helping out with that. And then we have our ramp here, and then we have back here at the back end of the fight. This is where I did not trust my healers enough, so you can see that I used one radiance, and then I was gonna save the other one to ramp, but I ended up using it because we started taking damage, and I just there's times where the raid's going to be taking a lot of damage, especially in hectic fights like this, especially towards the end of Huntsman, where the whole raid is taking a ton of damage. There's Sinseekers flying everywhere. There's the dog walking around and doing just a ton of damage to the whole group. You just have to kind of let go of your responsibility a little bit in that aspect, and you have to allow your other healers to pick up the pace and allow yourself to trust your other healers so that you can do what you're good at. Because if I had 2 radiances here for this last ramp, it would have been to increase my healing significantly over pressing a radiance right here. So I just needed to just let the raid be at half HP during that time. As long as I can put a little bit of faith into the healers and they can, pick up the pace during that, and they can buy me an extra 15 seconds of time, then I can double radiance and use my ramp here. And again, during the last phase, we kind of just ramp when it's available. It doesn't have to be with Sinseeker, but I still ended up lining mine up with this last Sinseeker here. So that is Huntsman. That's what you should be looking out for. Hopefully this video helps you, whether you're, again, in progress or farm. You can go into this fight and kind of understand it a bit more through the perspective of a Disc Priest and just overall as a healer. So Thank you so much for watching, and have a wonderful day.